Courtney, and I'm here with a video using the Stamping Friends stamp set by Create a Smile, and I'm going to be creating sort of a scene here. So I'm going to start off with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to an A2 size card, and I'm using my T-square ruler here just to draw a straight line on the top portion of my card. My scene is basically going to be a crafting surface or desk or table, whatever you want to call it. So this is going to be the back of my desk. So I'm switching over to a pencil here, and I'm going to be drawing in a card, basically a card that will be sitting on the desk. So because I'm looking at the desk the way I'm looking at it instead of looking directly above it, the top line of my card is going to be slightly shorter, and the vertical lines are going to be more diagonal. So the card is going to appear smaller the further back it gets, just perspective wise. And I'll go over this with a Copic safe pen later. But first, I wanted to make this appear as if it's being held down by washi tape. And there's a stamp in the stamp set that is a roll of washi tape, but I don't want the whole roll. So I'm going to mask out the roll itself with some Post-it note tape, ink up the rest of the stamp, remove that Post-it note tape, and then stamp this in all four corners of my card. Just making sure that I mask this out each time. I'll take a Copic safe pen just to kind of fix up the one area that was masked to make it look like it was actually washi tape ripped off. And there's a little smear there on the bottom left-hand one, but I'm going with it. It is what it is at this point. So next I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my images. And I have a piece of Eclipse masking paper off to the left-hand side there, and I'm creating a mask or stamping on my masking paper anyway for most of the images that I'm using, just because at this point in the game I really don't have much of a plan. So I'm stamping them just in case I need a mask. So I'm going to start off with this little ink pad here, and for the second one, I didn't get a great impression, and that's totally my fault. I was rushing or just not paying attention. So I tried to restamp it directly over that same first image, and it kind of got a little splotchy on the bottom left or off to the left-hand side, but that's fine. Again, I'm going to keep going with it. I'm just going to decide that all of my shading will be to the bottom left, and you'll never know the difference. So I stamped out one of my little ink blending tools and then one of these little markers. Now you'll see me kind of twisting and turning and kind of testing out each of these images because I didn't have a plan and I wasn't sure where each of these images are going to be going. I kind of just had to play around as I went along. I wasn't sure if any of the images were going to be overlapping, so I kind of figured I was running out of room already, so it's time to start cutting some masks. I cut out that first marker and mask that out, and that's where I'll actually put my scissors above that, and the blades of the scissors will appear to be just underneath that marker. Anything that you stamp out first will appear to be on top of whatever image you stamp second. And I did have to kind of twist and turn this as well, just because I didn't think that I had saved enough room to put all of these things in. Now I wanted to have another ink blending tool there, and I ended up not needing this mask, but I thought maybe that they would overlap, so I did fussy cut this out as well. Now I'm using Eclipse masking paper here just because I'm not doing any ink blending in the background. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this masking paper if you're doing distress ink or distress oxide ink blending because it's not as tacky. So I typically use the Simon Says stamp. That's my favorite masking paper to use, but I knew if I was just stamping out things, I didn't necessarily need to use that. So like I said, these didn't overlap, so I didn't end up needing to do that anyway. Wanted to add another marker here, and again, kind of playing around to make sure that this fit. I was initially going to try to fit another ink pad on the top, but that was not going to happen. So I ended up taking the marker cap and just adding another one of those. And in the white spaces that I kind of had left over, I took the sequin image and just stamped those all around because if you guys use sequins, They pretty much are all around. I find sequins in my bedroom, my bathroom. I've dragged them to work before, so it is what it is. So for my little card itself, I'm going to go ahead and go over my pencil lines with my Copic Safe pen and just avoiding going over the little washi tape and the marker that's hanging off there, even though I still do have that mask down. Going to stamp out that washi tape image on that Eclipse masking paper and fussy cut just the part that is actually stamped out on my card, and also use some post-it note tape to mask out the bottom and the left-hand side of the card. Going to be creating a card within my card, I guess you could say. So it makes it look like whoever's craft table this is, they're actually working on a card. So I'm taking another Create a Smile stamp set, and this is Magic Flowers, and I'm using one of the smaller flowers in the stamp set, and the sentiments in this stamp set are super tiny, so I thought that this would be perfect to fit on my little teeny tiny card there. So I'm going to stamp that out as well. I did stamp that with my Copic Safe ink because I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to color the card or just leave it white. Ultimately, I left it white and I didn't need to worry about it, but usually the blackout ink gives you a pretty crisp image anyway. So I went ahead and removed all my masks and erased my pencil lines, and we'll move on to the coloring. Now I have this sped up a lot. I'm starting off by mapping out my shadows on each of my images with my E53, which will ultimately be the color of my craft table here. And I'm concentrating all of my shadows being on the bottom left. Created a shadow for everything except for the washi tape and the card because that's flat against the desk. There wouldn't be a shadow. So I'll zoom in here in a second. Um, and now I'm going to go in with the E59, and basically I'm just going over those areas that I had mapped out with that E53. This not only saturates my paper, but just in case I put my shadow in the wrong spot, I can just correct it by it being the lightest color before going in with the darkest color. Next, going in with the E57, extending those shadows out a little bit further. Basically, all I'm doing is going directly over the E59 and just making those lines, or those curvy lines, or outlines really, I should say, just a little bit thicker. Going in with the E57, and I'm going to do the same thing with that, going directly over the parts that I've already added, but just making them a little bit thicker. Now, like I said, the craft table is going to be the E53, majority of it, but the further back something is, the darker it'll be. So the end of my desk where we drew that line is going to be the darkest area. So I'm going to keep out that E55 and just kind of saturate my paper a little bit to make my blending a little bit easier. And I'm just going to be doing just a little bit of shading to make this part appear a little bit darker or more in the background, I guess. Not using my E57, I felt that that was going to be a little bit too dark. I'm going to use my E57, or if I'm not using my E59, I'm using my E57. I don't even know what I said to begin with. But I'm going to go back and do some flicking. If you're having a hard time blending, go back and just flick out the color and you'll find that the blending becomes a lot easier. Once that E55 was down, I'll cover up everything with the E53, just kind of going around each of these images. I did have to fix up some of the areas with my colorless blender, either because I had a lot of ink down and it bled, or because I'm just messy and careless sometimes. So before I actually went in with my coloring, I did want to remove as much of the ink as possible. And when you do this, you kind of want to start away from the ink and push the ink back towards where it's supposed to be. I find that to be the easiest. So we're going to start off with the coloring of these markers. And I'm going to keep my cool grays out for a while because we have quite a few things that are that color. So these are more of a light gray because I'm going to color these as if they're Copics. Going in with my C5 and just adding my shading, then going in with the C3, extending that out a little bit, and then finally the C1 and pretty much filling in the entire marker, going back in with that C5 and adding those little stripes that are part of the marker. And if you guys know what Copic markers look like, those little stripes that tell you which end is what. And I added these last because I didn't want these to blend in once I colored with the C1. Keeping my C markers out, but switching over to the C7 as being my darkest color for the blades of my scissors, and just concentrating my darkest areas where one blade is under the other and underneath the little handles. For the handles of my ink blending tool, as well as the packaging, I guess it would be for the ink pads, this would be black as well. Going to cover up the entire area with my lightest color, the C3, concentrating my darkest areas on the handles being on either side because this is a round object. And for the ink pads, it will be to the bottom left because I messed up on my stamping, so I have to do my best to cover this up. This is why I'm coloring these black. I just figured that would be the easiest to do. Blending that all those areas out with the C5, and then finally the highlight will be the C3. Not much of a highlight left on the little ink pads, but you do have pretty strong highlight for the ink blending tools because they're round objects, so you want to make sure that you do preserve that highlight. For the other part of the ink blending tools, I'm going to be coloring these as if they're wood, so you guys all know what these look like. So I'm just coloring them as if they are the ink blending tools that are sitting on my desk. Concentrating my darkest areas being on either side. Once again, because this is a round object, you want to preserve that highlight in the center. Also adding a little bit of a shadow underneath where the handle meets the rest of the tool, I guess. I don't know what that would be considered, but I don't really have too much room for that highlight color there, but just as long as it's on the round area, you should be good to go. For the ink pads and the little foam pads on the ink blending tools, I'm going to be coloring these pinks and purples. So again, going in with my lightest color. For the ink pads, I'm going to be doing my shading on the bottom left. So pretty much I'm drawing an L and then blending it out from there. Drawing an L and then just flicking out in the bottom left-hand corner just a bit, and then extending that each time with my midtones and then my highlight color just in the top right corner of those little ink pads. For the ink blending tool or the foam pad there, I'm concentrating my darkest areas, again being on either side. Anytime it is a round object, your highlight will be in the center. This will give anything a round appearance, even if it's not round and you want it to make it look round. Just keep your highlight in the center. Doing the same thing with the other ink pad and the ink blending tool there. And then we will move on to the card, the little flower on the card. And I'm not going to color this as if it's my own card. I'm not going to, do all that much shading. I am doing shading, but I'm going to go right in with my darkest color and just add some shading where one petal is laying underneath another and at the base of those petals up in front, blending that out with the Y08 and then finally the Y02 and filling in each of those petals. For the center of the flower, I want this to appear raised up, so my highlight will be in the center, but more towards the right. So I'm going around the edge with my darkest color, but it's a little bit thicker down on the bottom left. And then just blending that out each time, there'll be a little circle that you're left with for your highlight, but again, this will be more towards the right, but still kind of in the center. One of my Copic markers on my desk here is going to be that yellow that I used to color the flower, so I'm going to use that same combination to color the cap as well as the tip of my marker. Moving on to the scissors, I couldn't really do much shading here because these are really teeny tiny areas and I'm using red, so I didn't want to take any chances here as for my colors to bleed. So I'm just using two colors and going in with the darkest and then the lightest very quickly. I don't want this to bleed. For my washi tape, I'm going to be using some YG and some BG markers here. For the main part, I guess, not the striped part, is going to be my YG markers. Going to fill in the entire area with my lightest color, get that paper saturated, then do a little bit of shading on the bottom part of the washi tape. There's really not that much contrast here, but that's okay. It's not like it's a shiny object. It wouldn't really have that much dimension to begin with. Only using 3 colors for this, and for the stripes, only using 2 colors, going right in with my darkest color, then my lightest color. Again, this will prevent any bleeding. I didn't want my blues or my blue-green to bleed onto my YG area. I wouldn't be able to remove it. So for the other Copic marker that is sitting on the desk here. I'm going to switch over to some B markers and just use a 3-color blend here too. Teeny tiny area, starting right off with my darkest color, blending it out with my mid-tone, and then back to the lightest color. For the sequins, I wanted these to be clear, but I'm too messy and had some ink bleed on them. So I'm just putting a little bit of shading with my E15 right in the center of each of the sequins, kind of where they're caved in a little bit. And then I will color them completely in with, it's not actually the gold, it's mustard, I think it's called, but it's more gold to me. So I'm going to fill that in, and then that will appear to have gold sequins on my little desk here. So I added the rest of the shadow on that one marker where it's hanging off the card with some C markers, and then I'm using some Post-it note tape to mask out my desk and do some ink blending in the background using Tattered Rose and Sponge Sugar Distress Oxide inks. Once I got these down, I realized that these are pretty far apart. One's pink, one's more of a peachy color, so they weren't blending all that well as far as getting it dark to light. So I ended up going over the entire thing with the Tattered Rose to make it more peachy than pink. This is actually the color of my old craft room before I moved into the largest room in the house. So once that was done, once my ink blending was done, I moved on to the sentiment. There is a few different sentiments in this stamp set, and they are so perfect for any crafter. And I went ahead and stamped that with black dye ink by Simon Says Stamp right in the center towards the top. Well, it's not really the center. What I thought was the center, it's a little bit off, but I'll fix that later too. Now I added a little bit of sparkle to my sequins because all of sequins have a little bit of shine to them. And this was not looking like a desk to me. It was just looking like I drew a rectangle and just started stamping stuff for no rhyme or reason. So I walked away from this for a little while and came back later just to kind of take a second look at it to make sure I'm still not liking it. But you guys know I'm probably my own worst critic. So what I ultimately decided to do was to draw the edge that it would be closest to you, the edge of the table. And all I did was take my EK Success journaling pen and my T-square ruler, used my grid mat to line this up perfectly because T-square ruler is not going to always give you a straight line when you're so close to the edge. So just keep that in mind. Been there, done that. So I'm just going to draw a straight line to create my edge, and I'll do a little bit of shading towards the bottom part. And the highlight will be where the corner of the table, I guess, would be. Using those same E50 markers, darkest color being the E57, blending that out with the E55, and then finally finishing off with the E53. Now, some of my objects that I had stamped out, like that marker, the ink pad, and one of those sequins is kind of hanging off the side of the desk, which if you guys are anything like me, if I look at my desk right now, I have things hanging off of it. So I'm not really too worried about that. Off camera, I did stamp a few of those sequins, didn't color them, just stamped them around my sentiment to make it appear that it's more centered than it is. But that is the card for today, guys. Oh, I did add a few highlights with my white gel pen to those handles of the ink blending tool. But that is it. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Have a great day. Bye.